Half a day, half a day. All right. All right, just checking to make sure we are good. We are live. Again, half a day. Buenas. Again. Today I am Han Solo Malolo today para este episode Fanachu. Buenas. Inanhusi Michael Luhan Bavakwa. This episode of Fanachu is Chamorro War Survivor Stories Part 4. This is a series that was started several years ago, and its focus was about sharing Chamorro War survivor stories. More than 20,000 Chamorros in Guam experienced Japanese occupation for 32 months in World War II. And for a few generations now, especially in July, but throughout the year, those stories sometimes are recounted, retold. Some stories are too traumatic. They are not passed on. They are not documented. They are not collected. But what we find now is as we move further and further away from that period in time, more and more of our elders, Imanam Kota, who experienced that the Japanese occupation have left us. And so what we find is that, of course, the nature of the war survivor stories that we hear have changed. And so this is why this conversation over Chamorro war survivor stories is very important. Because if you look at the stories that were shared 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and then today, what you'll find is, of course, that those who are around to do the telling, those who felt comfortable sharing, um, the stories are drastically different. What is emphasized is completely different, and so on. And so this is why it's important that we have space for remembering not just those who are with us still, because many of those who are with us still were young children when the war broke out, some of whom may have been teenagers, some of whom may have been even small children, babies. And so their memories are completely different than those who were their parents. And then those who were their grandparents and aunts and uncles have long since left us. And so this is important in terms of remembering the history of this time is that is that the memories of somebody who has responsibility for others in a time of war is different than somebody who is a child in war. And so that's why having a space in which we can share the war story, the war survivor stories of even those who have left us, um, to help prepare us for the time in which there will be no living war survivors who we can reach out to. We can see that now for some other wars that just a generation ago, there was still a few people that you could reach out to and say, oh, there was some World War I veterans who were still around. It's getting to the point now where World War II veterans, you know, are disappearing. And then Korean War veterans, you know, and people who were alive at that time, you know, they will pass on. And so this is part of this process of preparing ourselves to tell these stories, to pass it on, but also to remember that the stories that we share, they don't belong to just one generation, that there's always more than just what one generation, one particular perspective has. And so that's why it's important for me, because this is the fourth in this series, that it's not just from one perspective. It's not just from somebody who was a child, who was an adult, who was a man, who was a woman, who had this experience, who was from the South, who was from the North, who was from Hagatnya, who was from anywhere. But just remember that there was lots of different experiences that Chamorros had. And so one particular experience shouldn't define everybody, and so on. And so this is why we get into this habit of having space for these stories in their multivocality, in all the different voices that they have. And so, and so I want to thank all of you who are tuning in today. We're going to share a few different war survivor stories from a few different sources. And one of the reasons why I also like to have this now, um, is because to share with people the types of resources that are out there. Because sometimes people say, oh, there's no resources, there's nothing out there. And this is very, very important nowadays because many people are accustomed to thinking that the world is at their fingertips and they feel like so much is at their fingertips. But in truth, much of what you receive is algorithmically determined, and you may feel like everything is coming to you because you want it to, or you're finding what you want. But in truth, it may be restricted in certain ways by an algorithm. And that algorithm may care very little about giving you Chamorro information or giving you things connected to Chamorro language, history, and so on. And so this is what some people find, for example, when you look for things on YouTube. If you're looking for Chamorro interviews on YouTube, there's a lot of them. But when you search for them, sometimes you'll be led down different random places and it'll be hard to find. And so I share these things to let people know that there's lots of stuff out there. The problem, though, is that the algorithm thinks you want something else. It'll try to lead you towards something else. It'll lead you in a different direction. And so I like to do this so that people know that our voices, the voices of our people, are out there. They have been documented, they have been recorded in different ways. And so you can find them, but you have to be persistent. You have to remember that no matter what your politics are, Elon Musk, Meta, AI, all this and that, they're not your friends. They're not trying to help you find your culture, your language, your history, or anything like that. And so you may have to push beyond whatever they're selling you, whatever is coming in between you to find these things that are out there. Because YouTube, for example, is a great place in which people have stored so many things, in which you'll find hundreds of interviews with Chamorro elders, but a lot of them are buried in personal accounts, Chamorros who have just talked to a grandparent and then posted an interview of their grandparent there. And the algorithm has no interest in sending you to that person's page because no one watches that page. There's no money and there's no ads on that page. So it's not going to try to send you to somebody's personal page where there's just 3 subscribers and that person hasn't posted anything in 10 years. But there's so many Chamorro videos like that are up there. And so I love to do episodes like this to remind people that stuff is out there, but you may have to hunt for it, you may have to search for it. And so one of the great resources for this type of information, these types of these types of voices, of course, is local news in Guam. And if you go back far, a lot of it is print, so it's written down. But more recently, you can find news media like TV. And for example, you will find that KOAM has been pretty consistent in putting its segments on YouTube and so you will find dozens, if not hundreds, especially around July, sometimes in December, but primarily in July, they will have features in which a war survivor is interviewed. It might be a short interview, it might be a longer interview. There was a big spike in this when the issue of war claims and war reparations for Chamorros was on the table. And so, but you can go back even further, you will find lots of these. And so if you're looking for Chamorro voices, Chamorro stories, you will find some like this. And so let us begin with some of these types of stories. And so let's begin now with 2 segments from KOAM Guam War Survivors.
Emma continues that Afligui was just 12 years old when Guam was invaded by the Japanese on December 8, 1941. She just left church in Sumai village when the attack began.
All the things that the good targets for them were Sumay, the Marine Barracks, the cable station, and first of all that they bombed is the Standard Oil. And when that blew up, it was almost pitch black.
Just a child at the time, it was pure chaos. She remembers the march to Meningen. She almost didn't make it.
Sometimes I couldn't continue because it really hurts. It really hurts. I was very young at the time, and the sufferings. We all went, it's a long trek, and it's so, the hardship of, the young children at the time and the old people. It's so hard, but I think the Lord just gave us strength to continue and brave all these sufferings.
1 year into the Japanese occupation came forced labor. Children treated as slaves to work the rice fields. Aflagui was too young, but that didn't stop the Japanese.
I had a job. This long bamboo, with water. I have to carry that, and whoever wants to drink from one end to the paddy pads to the other end, that was my job. And that was very hectic under the hot sun.
When she was done with delivering water, she was forced on her knees to plant rows of sweet potato and corn. The problem, the Japanese were furious because she didn't count the kernels. Fearing for her life, she was spared a beating.
Chamoru, interpreter, came and stopped the whole thing, and then he had a long talk with the leader, and our punishment was only to go backtrack the rows and get all the kernels.
It was through her courage, strength, and prayers Aflagui was able to celebrate the first Liberation Day in 1947. She was even runner-up for Miss Liberation. 67 years later, she returns to celebrate as the Grand Marshal for the village of Sinahanyu. Reporting for Guam's News Network, I'm Jonah Gonçalves.
Biba, Biba. Biba. And so, as you can see, if you're looking for Chamoru War survivor stories, July is always the time that you want to look for. The news media in Guam always tries to feature those types of stories, and they have for the longest time. And so let's look let's listen to another. So that was Emma Quintanilla Aflagui, just 12 years old. And so when the war started, let's look at now another war survivor story, another one from KUAM.
Surrounded by several of his grand and great-grandchildren, Antonio A. Calvo recently celebrated his 84th birthday.
I'm very happy we survived, and I'm still alive.
84 years young and a lifetime of family memories and serving decades in public service, including several years working for the governor's office in the 1950s and 60s and serving 12 years as the commissioner of JIGO. Like the many other Manumco being honored this liberation, he is a survivor of the Japanese occupation of Guam during World War II.
They slap you, and sometimes if it's very serious, boy, they use some stick to whip you.
Don't be fooled by his warm chuckle. It wasn't easy. He was just 14 years old when the Japanese invaded Guam.
Every time I think of that during the war, it's a little bit rough, but you know how it is.
Calvo, like other children at the time, were forced to work. His first job gathering food for his captors and working the airfields in Tizen.
After that, they took me up to JIGO again to the northern to join the group that are taking, Dummy Canyon, to install Dummy Canyon at Paddy Point. So my assignment is to cut coconut trees, the trunk, 20 feet long, and we carry that all the way to Paddy Point. When we are putting the canyon, the Dummy Canyon in Paddy Point, it's a rough trail. And the Japanese hit me sometimes because I'm a little bit slow, because actually those rocks and, carrying that load, it's hard. But well, that's how it is, you know. We just obey.
After forced labor came the march to Menengan.
When we reached Menengun, the Japanese told us that this is the place where you people are going to stay. You cannot go out. You cannot build fire. Nobody's allowed to leave the camp. Look for a big tree and take shelter.
Food was scarce. He and his family would have to sneak out at night to search for.
We look for coconut, take it to the camp, and it's lucky that you don't have to cook the coconut, you know, just feed it and eat it.
67 years later, no matter how painful those days may have been, Calvo doesn't hold any ill will toward his captors.
I told my kids about that, said, oh, is that how they treat you? Said, yeah, I don't blame them because maybe they follow instruction from their higher, you know.
Antonio Calvo, this year's Liberation Grand Marshal.
Oh, wow. And so we hear from, at the start, we hear from some grand marshals for Liberation Day. And so we see and those interviews are from the 67th Liberation Day commemoration. And then think now that 2025 will be the 81st Liberation commemoration. And so to give you some perspective on these sorts of things, it's incredible. It's incredible. Even for me, thinking about those that going through some of the interviews, going through the past episodes that I've done, people that I interviewed 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, who have passed away, who I wish that I had been able to interview and talk to, but have passed away. And so for those of you who are tuning in, for those of you who are watching, please feel free to comment with any questions that you might have. If you want to type into the chat, into the live stream, to share the name of an elder in your family, an ancestor who experienced the war, and talk about their experiences, please feel free to do so. But Sidus Masi for tuning into this episode of Fanachu. And so we're going to, as we've just watched 2 videos from KOAM, we're going to change gears now, and we're going to actually we're going to read now about somebody who was a master of Chamorro culture, somebody who's very iconic. Her contributions to Chamorro language, Chamorro culture are very important. We're going to hear from the late Clotilde Castro Gould, known as Tanding Ding Gould. And so she was a master of Chamorro culture for storytelling. She was a master of Chamorro culture for Kantan Samarita. She was also the writer, the creator of Juan Malamunga, the Chamorro comic strip. And so we're going to talk a little bit about her war experience, because she is one of the many Chamorros, of course, talk about the hardships, the pain, but one of the things that is highlighted in her experience is also the ways that Chamorros found small, sometimes humorous ways of resisting. And so one of the things about Tanding was that she was creative. She loved to sing. This was something that if she carried throughout her life. It served her well as a teacher, as a writer. And so from the article on Guampedia, her biography there, it says that she was a motivated and bright student, and Gould, like many other children on Guam at that time, had her education interrupted by the Japanese occupation and World War II in the early 1940s. Many memories from war times involved difficulties during the Japanese occupation. Through her hardships, Gould maintained her strong will. One such incident involved her being taken from her home in Hagåtña by Japanese soldiers and forced, along with a few others, to walk to the rice paddies in Malesu. Gould escaped and found her way home. Another incident involved Gould's encounter with a Japanese soldier who prodded her with a shotgun and told her to bow. Instead, she started singing "God Bless America." And so, one of the things that Clotilde Gould Tanding talked about was the way in which language. And this is something in a previous episode of Chamorro War Survivor Stories. We talked Ben Blas, the late Ben Blas, former congressman, he talked about it too. And Clotilde Gould also talked about it. How that in a time when the Japanese had banned English and Chamorros could not speak Japanese for the most part, the Chamorro language actually became something that you could use to your advantage as a way to resist and a way to protect yourself. So singing God Bless America was actually a defiant move because the Japanese confiscated American books, things written in English. They tried to confiscate money, American flags. They banned the English language from being used. And so you couldn't sing English songs, of course. And so singing God Bless America, humming it, for example, was considered to be a defiant act. But one of the ways that Chamorros, especially young children, one of the things that they liked to do was, one of the things that young children liked to do was when they attended Japanese school and as they were taught songs in Japanese, or as they were taught prayers, as they were taught pledges in Chamorro or in Japanese, is that they would change them, change the lyrics, change the words in order to tease the Japanese. And oftentimes their teachers, the soldiers who could not speak Chamorro, had no idea what they were saying, no idea what was going on. And so in Cecilia Taitano Perez, who recently published her book, Signs of a Spiritual Being, or Chamorro, Signs of Being, in her article, Liberation, a Retelling, Clotilde Gould talks about how there was one example of this was the song Fanmatu Manhengi, O Come All Ye Faithful, that Chamorro children, her for example, would change the lyrics and they would make it and they would tease their Japanese teachers, and their Japanese teachers wouldn't be able to really understand what they were saying. So for example, Clotilde Gould said that this is what they would sing. Ilek niya si sense nagwidzazu usmami lomandagi si sense sabasigu dami danaka shemprio matulaika imisudzani katsap puripanzan mantikidza ganyaku americanu kitsapanes. I hope I hit the tune right. But of course, Fanmatu Menhingi, O Come All Ye Faithful. And of course, the lyrics say, the teacher says that he is our God, but teacher is lying because he has slant eyes. And then Damin Danaka, don't you believe it? Shempri Umatalaika, the Imisuzani Ketsup, Puripanzani Mantekidza. So you know it's a Chamorro resistant song or a Chamorro song talking about anxiety over cultural change or oppression if food is mentioned as being the metaphor. And so here she's saying that, you know, the soy sauce and the miso is going to be replaced soon with bread and butter. I prefer the Americans to the Japanese. And so there was other examples of this that other Chamorros, and Clotilde Gould gave other examples in other interviews where they would have to give pledges and speeches about the emperor, and that Chamorro kids would take joy in changing some of the words, and then they would belt it out, and the Japanese teachers would be impressed, but in truth, they were completely mocking in Chamorro what was being said, what the emperor or the Japanese or their teachers and so on. And so a simple way in which language could be used to find some joy in a time of oppression. But Clotilde Gould was a very critical person, though. And so she was asked in 1977 about her experience with language during World War II. And remember, this is 1977. This is a time, you know, in which Chamorros had begun to protest around things and begun to assert their rights in an indigenous context. And so she was asked about her war experience, and Clotilde Gould Menhalom Natalta, she had no trouble connecting her experience there with her experience under the United States as well. So she said during the occupation, the Japanese forbade all things American, whether it was studies, reading books, magazines, or listening to the radio. It was not just learning Japanese, it was also being brainwashed into being patriotic. Gould was 16 at the time of liberation. She remembered the days of the oppression. Every day, every student in class had to turn towards Japan and sing to the emperor. When July 21st, 1944, and liberation finally arrived, the children were already 3 years behind their American counterparts. She says, but the American liberation did not mean freedom from all restrictions, only freedom from the Japanese and oppressions of war. There was still oppression, Gould recalled. This time, instead of Guamanians being forbidden to speak English, the children were forbidden to speak Chamorro in school. A child was fined a penny for every word of Chamorro he spoke, Gould said. The fines were assessed monthly. And that gives you a sense of how Clotilde Gould was, somebody who was very critical. She had no problem calling out the Japanese, but she also had no problem being critical of the United States when they were wrong as well. And that's why she joined protests of the Pacific Daily News when they had policies that were anti-Chamorro. And that's why she later helped to make the first Chamorro comic strip with Juan Malamunga. So, but that's one of the things that, that's one of the things that I always like to remind people about, a language. When people emphasize that the only value of a language is that it can get you a job, is that it can connect you to markets, connect you to all these things. No, those are important functions of languages, but languages also have values within a community, within generations. Like a language is not only exist to be exploited for capital. And Chamorros in the war saw that value, that having something that outsiders could not understand effectively, that they had to bring in interpreters to access, that gave them some breathing room and some ability to resist, even in small ways. That was very, very important at that time. Okay. And so let's now, if you have any questions, if you want to share anything, por favor, let me know. Put in some comments there. I am on my own, and so I haven't shared much. I haven't been able to put many comments or share much because I'm doing it all on my own today. But let me type in a comment here. There we go. Okay. And so the next video that we are going to watch is one that, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the story of the people of Malesso during World War II, the massacres at Tinta, Faja, and then the uprising of the men of Atati, the people who fought back, led by Tonko Regis. And so there has been a commemoration. Roads have been renamed in the village to honor those who fought back. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to listen to a part of the interview with Jose Mata Torres, who published a memoir of his experiences in World War II, called The Massacre at Atati. And so here we go. Okay, Nigel Raptor, por favor. Give me 1 second here, Dispensazo. I'm just loading this up. But if you have not read The Massacre at Atati, I highly recommend it. Because Jose Torres was a teenager during the war. But his descriptions of pre-World War II Malesso are beautiful. His descriptions of the war and his experiences during the war are important. And then his description of the uprising at Atati when these men led by Tonko Ray just fought back and killed the Japanese are crucial. And it's wonderful that UOG Press published this book, and more students in high school should study it, just because it's such an important part of our history that now is finally getting more and more attention. But so let me just cue this up, because we're going to watch a little bit. He's going to talk about a little bit about his and this video is from the Honga Motna project. So this interview was actually filmed a few months before Jose Torres passed away.
Natago 4 días, pues anay masotto 4 días perdiado tutun malago todo están malahan. Pues na usodda na man makoni tal tamaleso.
Wait. Okay, hold on. Nango and Rato. Wait, Laziano. All right, STK.
Man ma dao talo the Washington na tauto man malista 16 o 19 na tauto lalayan pamalawan sa pamalawan wa investigadora wa tidania sa panis sa man mapolo gi adi cave ki da tinta da man madagwalong grenade da gihin na okasyon 16 na Chamoru man mate ki da tinta. In the meantime, it's a Japanese name, man adik chenten na lalahi. Ide man donkulo dan man healthy and all that. Pues man makoni, in English for the longest time, we didn't know what happened to them. Lo intingwa na baba pra utimanya. Pues anay man magago voluntario na Chamoru decide na Jose Soriano Reyes cuida tumutuhan decide na pa Pino es Japanese. Pues en Pino 3 ginenguido 2, 3, 4 na Japanese sa puno di camp ni Latsago gi main camp ni. Pues na arali tauto da manono para na manglagi asais na Japanese da man mapuno lokin sa mono man mapuno man strangle sa tada me sintitilina. Pues no después de eso no mangago si guajo mi idea per ben queso da americano americano all over the place ibat konya nilia udong ani empoegi ibat konari kada jama bobomba esta tada no resistance in Japanese pues no ana en Pino en Japanese 10 na Japanese en Pino actually 11 sa lo adi otro apuno mai sabe lo 10 na Japanese en Pino me gana man mapuno man manyaka ni Chamoru la lolo matu di analenya stonko ni tapuno de gidate maneso lo mono para en Fanachu en Pino Japanese esta itenta usangan agwini itenta esta renan di size na Chamoru man mate kwasya pamalan Adi strengthening the lahi ni man magic ni Japanese. Man mapo da tintingo manu mangai Japanese rocky apunu and strengthen the auto. Pues an empino Japanese name Sizen volunteers. Man mapot man man nonom di atati at wina puegi man motom dono Cook Island. Pues sa gente dia man makoniam ni destroyer. Man matom kindi destroyer ya no atungo y americano hafa masusede. Pues gonna destroyer pues humano o que size na voluntario. Gonna destroyer como ni hani size ni manudong gigante dia. Impino Japanese ginani y pueden manana para Cook Island. Pues manana empieza yudong galaide da man pick up ni Wadsworth. Pues ni Wadsworth man transferian para na batko mafananan George Clymer. De managam unos cuantos días. Pues no ana man matan que George Clymer sado que sangani tanto que americano que Wadsworth necesita dudo sa un escape más que Japanese que ya tiene en pino ne un escapa que tú hacen un escapa lo uno a un escapa y por malo todo en pino man puno man menyukota pues no aduge no mami na ohano de fangone Japanese más de vida se tate de van mapuno y Chamoru. Pues na manano para dono gina puede de después siguiente día na manhudungan gebatko da matungo americano afan sede ne pues siguiente día manano $5 americano para ne mangai Chamoru gida finile elodiane da man mai sigayon tati hogat pues na puede casi 4 o 5 días después de mana holumo gitano ginibatko ne adona man motu kinaleso mana fan hono malesu o matek pues canto tasi que man motu hogat pues no 4 o 5 días y da hogat pues man masota man masangoniam na tesinya manano tati y da maleso está secure tada Japanese we pesado na biram tati ya no man alom tati gimamam ya
No, right. And so that is Jose Torres. The longer in Jose Mata Torres, the longer interview, of course, is more than an hour. And it covers, not just his World War II experience, but also his life after the war, going to school in the States, and then also his work with Litico Bodig, and so on. And but it's one of the things that was really nice though was, of course, to have him tell his World War II experience in Chamorro. And one of the really nice things, if you have read Massacre at Aptati, is the fact that although the book is written in English, much of the dialogue when people are speaking, of course, is in Chamorro. So even the scene in which the men of Malesso are killing the Japanese, the dialogue is in Chamorro with English translations. And part of it is just because it was the war, and this was still the time in which Chamorros primarily spoke Chamorro to each other. And so it didn't make sense for, you know, for Jose Torres, when he wrote the book, it didn't make any sense for him to write it in English because the war experience was in Chamorro for him. The prose, the descriptions could be in English because that was different, but the voices, as he recalled people saying things, yelling things out, as he recalled scenes, it had to be in Chamorro because it was all in Chamorro. And so, but one of the things that also comes out in that story is that not just did they kill the Japanese in Atati prior to the start of the American quote unquote liberation while the bombs are still falling on the island, but then, as he was mentioning, 6 of them, Torres included, got a galaidi, paddled out to Donu to tell to give information to the American ships circling the island. And so for Torres and those who went out there, they felt strongly like they had given some of the first intelligence about what was actually happening on Guam to the United States. That they had talked about fortifications, supply depots, all sorts of stuff that they had all worked on, that's the stuff that they shared with the American Navy people that debriefed them once they got onto the Clymer and then the Wadsworth. And so wanted to share that. But remember, Massacre at Atati by UOG Press, a great book for a variety of reasons. And so, okay, now we're going to get into the last video that we are going to be, the last video and then the last story. And the last video that we're going to be watching is it's a beautiful video. It's a little bit long, but it's worth it. It comes from Nihi and Pacific Historic Parks. It's part of their Hasuds and Onra segment. And it features Joaquin Danny Santos, Colonel, telling his story. He was another young man during the war. And so it is, yeah, there's not much more that I want to say actually to prep it. We should just watch it, and then we will talk more afterwards. So go bonito.
People were very helpful with one another. They shared whatever is available. One shrimp would be chopped up in several pieces and distributed among several families just to have something that can be eaten. I don't recall exactly when we left Asan to go to Maningan, but it happened in the evening. It was my grandfather, Juan Aflapi Santos, my grandmother, Maria Siguenza Santos, and my uncle Gregorio and Jesus, teenagers at the time, and my brother Eddie Limtialco Santos, and myself. Tata and Granny had a caribou cart, and the elderly, the sick, were put in the back of the cart, and we walked from Asan to Meningan. What I recall, once we got to Meningan, everybody knew what to do, cut the bamboos and build shelters. It was just a makeshift, like thatch roof. Granny had something to put on the floor, whatever the floor was. Whenever there is an indication that the planes were in the vicinity, I remember that my grandparents would put us all together, and they would put their bodies over us to protect us, like Tata and Granny and Gregorio and Jesus. Every morning, my task, along with my brother Eddie, was to go to the river, Meningan River, and collect water. We had a bamboo pole about this tall, and we all lined up, collected water, and we brought it back to the hut where we're at. And the river flows towards the ocean. The women on one side of the river downstream would be washing clothes or dishes. On this side would be people bathing, cleaning themselves. And then upriver, upstream, we all line up, single file. And only one person would go up to the stream to collect the water. And that single file was, very important, so that when you fill your bamboo pole with water, it's clean as much as possible. I found this to be very remarkable about the discipline. No one was enforcing it, but we were enforcing it ourselves. We were not allowed to have any fire except once a day. When the fire starts, the instruction was there's no smoke will be visible from the air. At an appropriate time, about mid-afternoon, the fire would be lit, and Granny would put this big pot, and then our job is to put the water on the pot. And then Eddie and I would be doing this to ensure that the flame doesn't go up. And everything that's edible is put in this pot. And what I remember is that nothing goes to waste. Nothing at all. And then when it's ready to put out the fire, they'll separate the wood and then put some dirt, and then when it's ready to put it out, they'll put water, and then our job is to fan it so that the flame doesn't go up. What I remember also, when I was in Meningan, whenever it's dark, it's dark. Whatever light we have, it's natural light. If you hear anything, it'll be the prayers. Because everybody was praying just about every day. My grandparents, especially my grandmother Maria, was always saying the rosary. And if we have to sing, it will be very low, like humming, because they don't want to hear voices. And of course, we just pray. And one particular evening, she was crying and saying the rosary and asking my uncle Gregorio Siguenza to stand there so that she can look at him and put that imprint of his feature into her brain. She probably had an idea that something was going to happen to Gregorio. And then Gregorio left the following morning, early in the morning. I remember waking up to say goodbye to him. And, Gregorio with others, they just marched with the Japanese up north. Gregorio never returned. And of course, we had no idea where he was. In 2018, I attended one of the memorial in Saguan. I noticed that Gregorio's name is not listed as one of the 45. So I wrote my auntie, Dolores, to have her submit a statement and have it notarized that her brother Gregorio was 17 years old when he left Maningon to help the Japanese north. Their names are listed in addition to the 45 now. So the memorial it means a lot to me now because Gregorio's name is listed there. What I recall as a child in Maningan was the sharing of anything that's edible. The emphasis was to take care of the elderly, the sick, and the children. And I found it to be a lesson that will sustain me for the rest of my life. I learned about love. I learned about the purpose in life, to lean on God and God alone, to constantly pray for God's intervention. And I learned about forgiveness. I learned to forgive the Japanese in spite of the atrocity that they imposed on some of the Chamoros, just like us. Not all of us are good, some of us are bad. So you find that in all races. But for the most part, I learned to love and to forgive, and I lean on prayers.
Beautiful. Tragic, difficult, maput, makat, but a beautiful video. And so, but we look to groups like NIHI, like the Meningan Memorial Foundation, which continues to host annual events supporting the Sentimental Journey, breakfasts every December to support war survivors and their families, to honor them. And so, and NIHI, which, creates wonderful programming such as this, which can facilitate intergenerational transmission of knowledge and stories, values, and so on. We need more stuff like this out there because, as I said at the beginning, most of us can feel it. The idea that how many war survivors are left. Is it more than 1,000? Is it less than 1,000? But, in my family, there's, my grandparents have passed on. my yeah, and so the people who told me the most stories of World War II, they have passed on. And so it's even then thinking about the stories, even then thinking about how many events that I've gone to over the past 25 years where people have shared war stories, and how even I've seen war survivors, differences in generations amongst war survivors, where I've seen war survivors who were adults during the war look at those who were children during the war, each sharing their story. And then I have seen those who were older, had kids during the war, look at those who are young, telling their stories, and then just say, oh man, these people don't. These people, the war was fun, the war was stressful. but but everything will change soon. Just like everything will change soon once there's no once it's July rolls around, and the only war survivor you can find is somebody who was 1 year old when the US invaded, or they were a few months old when the US retook the island. And then it's the voices that we've recorded. It's the stories that have been written down. And then our living connection, our living, breathing connection changes. And so preparing ourselves for that task of passing on these stories is so important. And so it's good to see, though, that groups like Mihi, the Menengan Menengan Memorial Foundation, and groups like the Guam the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation as well, which did wonderful work around this, that they've been doing the work of documenting and helping prepare us for this task. It's really good. And so I want to thank everyone who has tuned in for this Han Solo Malolo episode of Fanachu. The title of the book, I think somebody is asking, is Massacre at Atati. And so I have so many screens open, I'm not sure. Hold on a second. Massacre at Atati. And so if you're still watching, because I know somebody just sent in a comment for that. But si dus masino hamzu todos, Fanachu will return to its regular programming with guests and so on, Gi otra semana.